Okay. So flag burning is a relatively new concept that developed around the Vietnam War. It wasn't really practiced before that, and it was also seen as very disrespectful. And pretty much all 50 states had laws that prevented flag burning. And even the Supreme Court upheld it in the past. For example, in the case of Halter v. Nebraska, it upheld Nebraska's ban on burning the American flag because they said it was obscenity. And traditionally, burning the flag was understood to be obscenity, which was an exception in the First Amendment of the Constitution. The this new concept was made out of thin air by the Supreme Court in 1989 with Texas v. Johnson. This had no precedent before that, or at least any profound precedent, because before all federal courts had ruled that that flag burning laws that ban flag burning were constitutional because they fall under obscenity. And obscenity is a very important thing because we've really weakened our obscenity laws in recent years. Like, for example, before pornography would fall under obscenity as well. And so, when we started weakening these obscenity laws, that is when they basically brought out of thin air that the First Amendment protected flag burning, even though it clearly does not. It does not mention anything about that. In fact, it barely touches on symbolic speech. It is in fact a ludicrous point to say that it should be illegal, because that's a very modernist interpretation. And we as conservatives say all the time that we like to stick to the original meaning, and the original meaning is pretty clear. The founding fathers saw the flag as a symbol of national unity that was very important, and it is relatively recent that's been degraded so far. If you ask someone from the 1950s, they would think the concept of flag burning is absurd and disrespectful. This new concept, which is obscene, and that's a fact, and many court cases back that up. And this shows us that this modern concept, for example, it's the same as I would compare it to Roe v. Wade. They pulled that right out of thin air as well. And so when the Supreme Court invents rights, that we all get hurt by that, because it stretches the Constitution to the point where what's next? We ban guns. Because if once you start stretching the Constitution, you can't unstretch it. So I think that it's very important that we look from a traditional concept of that flag burning was not protected before Texas v. Johnson. Thank you.
Man, I didn't realize I didn't realize when someone makes their introduction, if they go first, because last time I think I went first. I didn't realize how much you want to rebuttal things, but I'll try my best to start with just my introduction point. Okay, I'm going to start right now. So basically, I would like to first state that I understand this can actually be a pretty emotional topic for a lot of people, especially those on the right, especially those who have had family who served in the military. Maybe you served in the military, and I can reflect on that to an extent because I have a great grandfather who was really a war hero in World War II. He got a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, and a Purple Heart. This may sound like a red herring, but no, it's not at all, because a lot of people will often state, well, no, you shouldn't burn the flag because it shouldn't be legal to burn the flag because you're disrespecting the fallen. You shouldn't kneel for the anthem because you're disrespecting the fallen. And I agree with you on the moral level. Okay, but here's the thing: societal outrage alone does not justify prohibiting freedom of speech. And at the end of the day, freedom of speech extends beyond just the words that we are saying out of our mouth. Just the words that you say out of your mouth is not alone what is freedom of speech. The things that you type on your phone, when you post something on Twitter, that is freedom of speech. When you hold up a sign out in public, that is freedom of speech. Okay, freedom of speech extends to freedom of expression. It extends to words that don't just come out of your mouth. So it's not just that the words that you speak are necessarily what is free speech. So symbolic speech is touched upon indirectly, the same way that the things that you tweet is touched on indirectly, right? So that's what we have to keep into account. This idea that it's a modern standpoint isn't necessarily true. The idea that the founders would oppose freedom of speech or would oppose flag burning or would think that flag burning needs to be prohibited. I don't really see any evidence for that, because you have to keep in mind the founding fathers, the way that they protested a tyrannical government went far beyond just burning the American flag. Right, the founding fathers dumped tea into the Boston Harbor, and let's not forget they also burned statues of King George. Like they did things that were a lot more expensive than that. Now, granted, I know what you may come back with. They also did some violent riots. Does that mean they would think that that's protected? No, not necessarily. That's not what I'm saying, right? But what I am saying though is that they definitely would have there's a good chance that they would have stated that it is a slippery slope to say that you can't protest the government in this form, because it's a slippery slope, and eventually the government could just pass complete sedition act and state that you can't protest the government at all. At the end of the day, when I look at the American flag, and I'm sure everyone here, when we look at the American flag, we see a beacon of hope and a beacon of liberty. Not everyone's going to view it that way, and we have to respect that. Not everyone's going to view it that way, and people are going to protest it how they please, and that is something we have to respect. Thank
you. So you want me to begin my rebuttal? Okay. So it's interesting that you brought up like Sedition Acts, because the Sedition Act was actually signed into law by a founding father, John Adams. So the sedition, and that it passed several courts, including the Supreme Court. So technically, the Sedition Act was not a good argument, because the Sedition Act is still in the books today. Even more so, George Washington said in his letter to John Jay in 1786, "Without virtue, happiness cannot be attained. It is a vain attempt to secure liberty without virtue." And I would argue that burning the flag is not virtuous whatsoever. I think that it basically takes away from all American virtue. Not only that, but the other flags are banned from being burned. For example, you cannot burn the pride flag. You will be charged with a felony in over 26 states for doing that. And we've seen several cases where people have been dragged into court for doing that. Now, so I think it is more than fair that if you burn the symbol and beacon of freedom, that you can be charged for that, especially when burning a flag that I would say a lot of us think is bad is illegal. So why would something that most people universally think is good, why should that be legal? And not only that, but we are one of the only westernized countries that allows ourselves to be self-degraded by these self-aggrandizing laws that basically say, oh, but you can't burn a flag because free speech. No, that's not free speech. It's obscenity, and the Constitution is very clear. And the Supreme Court invented this right out of thin air. And I honestly believe that if you ask the Founding Fathers about it, they would say the same. The Founding Fathers would think it was an absurd concept. They would want to burn the symbol of national unity that many of our family members fought for. And I think that it's concerning the amount of people that say it's okay, because it's not. Even more Founding Fathers. Benjamin Franklin said the great cause for liberty must not be sullied by licentiousness. Which is he's basically saying that that liberty cannot be trounced by this so-called free speech. That is what I'm gathering from that. So I think this new concept, these are the same standards you'd be using to argue that Roe v. Wade is legal. That is what you're doing by saying that, because you're basically saying any new concepts that were invented should be allowed. Because, for example, the court on several occasions in the past has said that banning burning flags is perfectly constitutional and has been upheld. There is only one case that has not upheld it. So I think to say that it's the traditional view is that burning flags should be legal is objectively not true, because every state had it banned. All right.
Okay, so I would like to say that you keep jumping upon, okay, well, no, this is the real traditional viewpoint. And the thing is that we don't actually know for certain what our founding fathers' viewpoints were. You are correct that the initial sedition acts that were passed under John Adams, who, by the way, was one of the more liberal founding fathers. The only one more liberal was probably Alexander Hamilton. That is true that he did pass the Sedition Act, but also we have to keep into account that this is before the precedent of judicial review was more extended. So I mean, I do think in today's day it's pretty evident that would get struck down pretty quickly, right? But here's what I want to touch upon, because you keep saying that, okay, Texas v. Johnson just created a right out of thin air. That's not necessarily true. You have to actually think about what they were saying and what they were not saying. They weren't just creating some right. In fact, here's the actual expert from Texas v. Johnson. First, it said that the First Amendment literally forbids the prohibition of free speech, but we have a long record. Or my bad, I actually messed up here. My fault. The First Amendment literally protects speech that is not just quote unquote words spoken out of your mouth. Okay, that's what it starts with. And it says, and quote, flag burning constitutes as a form of symbolic speech that is protected by the First Amendment. The majority noted that freedom of speech protects actions that society may find very offensive, but this was their exact words. They said, quote, society's outrage alone is not justification for supporting banning free speech. So or suppressing free speech. So what you have to keep into account here is that just because society may view something as, being a beacon of hope, they might view something as very offensive to take away, or very offensive to, to burn, or very offensive to disrespect. You have to keep into account that alone is not justification for violating or for suppressing speech. Okay, and we also have to keep into account that what What is actually free speech that can be, what is actually speech that can be prohibited was established in the Schenck versus United States decision. And it's quote unquote clear and present danger. You know, when they say, okay, you can't say fire in a crowded movie theater, that's because yelling fire in a crowded movie theater causes quote unquote clear and present danger, right? Burning the American flag does not cause clear and present danger, unless you're doing it out in public, which that wouldn't be free. That wouldn't be you wouldn't be charged for burning the flag. You would be charged for arson at that point, right? And also, it is a constitutional right to burn the pride flag. Any state that's saying you can't, that needs to be struck down as well. So that was, I'm not going to say it was a red herring necessarily, but it wasn't really understanding what my argument is, and that's really all I have to say on that. Yep.
Okay. Justice Rehnquist wrote in his dissent to Texas v. Johnson, "The flag is not simply another idea or point of view. It is the symbol of our nation." He expressed this throughout his dissent that this is not the historical view, and that is a new one. It is pretty evident that he believed that, and also the First Amendment has a very specific carve out for things like obscenity, libel, or incitement of violence. And I would argue that burning the American flag is inciting violence, is inciting violence toward veterans and people like that. Not only that, but it disrespects the monumental sacrifice that our forefathers have made. So it is not a political debate at that point. It is a relatively new view, and like you can say it's not, but it's pretty clear. When 48 out of 50 states had laws saying you couldn't burn the American flag and it was a felony before Texas v. Johnson, it is pretty clear that is a new right. You cannot argue that it's not. And these laws were upheld many times before this. This was a new thing. Just like, so I would actually compare it to Roe v. Wade, because Roe v. Wade, abortion bans were upheld before Roe v. Wade. So it basically invented a right that was not there previously. And the founders were very clear about free speech's limits. They respected that free speech had a place in society, but it was not a place that could overstep. Even there was a federal law. There was a U.S. Flag Protection Act of 1968 passed during the Vietnam War that literally said you couldn't burn the American flag, which passed court muster, by the way. So before 1989, there was no practical or societal evidence that anybody with any judicial relevance thought that burning the flag should be legal. Thank you.
Okay. Mentioning the Vietnam War, mentioning any war is pretty irrelevant, because we know that this is just basic history. We know that your rights shrink significantly at a time of war. At a time of war, you can't criticize the government at all. So that's not a standard that we should apply universally. I would also say that it is definitely a stretch to say that burning the flag constitutes as obscenity. Okay, obscenity is not necessarily just doing something that offends people, right? It goes more beyond that. Okay, that's what I would say on that front. And also to state that burning the flag is an incitement of violence against veterans. Well, again, that's kind of a loose vocabulary or a loose language that you're using right there, because like you're trying to say that you're arguing the more strict viewpoint, the strict constructionist viewpoint, but you're actually arguing at a very loose interpretation when you say things like that. Because at the end of the day, you're stretching what people are going to mean when they are burning the flag. Okay, because I definitely see that as disrespecting veterans. But that doesn't mean just because someone does burn the flag that they're doing it to disrespect veterans, or that they're doing it to, incite violence on veterans. At a time of war, that's a different story, okay? And that's why that was passed back in the Vietnam War. But that's not a universal standard we should apply at all times in history, because when we're not at war, what is burning the American flag can be seen as a valid form of protest. Now, is that what I would do? No, it is not. I think you're a piece of shit if you do that. And I'll actually excuse my language, I don't want to curse, but I definitely am very against that. But at the end of the day, just because it offends me, just because it offends you, because it offends maybe some of the people listening right now, doesn't mean that alone can constitute as prohibiting free speech. Oh, I forgot to say, I muted myself already when I said I rest my case. Your turn.
All right, so I would actually go back to this. So there's actually several states where burning not only the pride flag, but the BLM flag and a couple indigenous flags and many other flags is illegal and is punishable by felony. So why exactly is the most sacred flag to our nation illegal to burn when those flags are not? And the Supreme Court has not overturned those laws. They have only said that for the American flag. I think this is an absurd precedent, and it is quite frankly insane. And I do not.
I dream about cheese.
And I do not think the founding fathers would have thought that burning the American flag was necessarily a legal form of protest, because they didn't, and they didn't, and I think there's a lot of evidence to show that. For example, the Sedition Act the Sedition Act is pretty clear that the founders thought that free speech was definitely limited, because the Sedition Act was proposed and signed by founding fathers. And so I think that creating these new rights that only apply to like the American flag and not to other flags is crazy, because there's no precedent for this. It's either all or nothing. And right now only the American flag is basically protected. You can basically say you can't burn any other flag, but you have to burn the American flag. Like, no, that's absurd. It's all or nothing, and right now it's not. Right now it's nothing. So I think it's quite frankly insane and disingenuous to say that burning the American flag should be legal, but another flag shouldn't. And I'm not saying you're making an argument, but that's the slippery slope you go down. Thank you.
I'll just go right now. You can start the timer whenever you're ready. Chase, I mean, here's the thing. What I want to say first is that you're mentioning a point that is pretty useless. Again, the debate right now is not regarding if we agree with the executive order morally, if we agree with what Eric said before we started the debate, the idea of all or nothing. We're just debating the constitutionality of burning the American flag. And yes, I 100% think that the Supreme Court needs to strike down any law within any state, whether it's a blue state or even if some red state is saying that it should be a felony to burn a BLM flag or a pride flag. They absolutely need to strike that down, because that is a clear violation of the First Amendment. But it doesn't take away that it's also a violation of the First Amendment to say that you can't burn the American flag, because it is a form of protest. And again, the burning the American flag does not cause clear and present danger, the same way yelling fire in a crowded movie theater or something of that nature would do. So that's what we have to keep into account when we're debating this topic. We are debating the constitutionality of this topic. We're not debating whether or not this extends to, or we're not debating if it's okay that the rules are being applied differently. No, we both agree that it should be legal to burn the BLM and LGBT flags. But here's the thing, though. The reason that liberals are saying that you can't burn the BLM and LGBT flag, they're operating on the same premise that you are, that because it hurts our feelings, because it causes societal outrage, because it's basically going to make certain individuals be uncomfortable, we have to prohibit it. No, it's going to make me uncomfortable if you burn the American flag, and that doesn't take away that it could be your form of protest. The same way some people may protest some of the extreme LGBTQ views that we're seeing by burning the LGBT flag. And we have to respect that that's a right. Even if you don't agree with someone doing that, that is still a constitutionally protected right. Because again, and you haven't been able to prove how this isn't the case, that our free speech extends beyond just words that are coming out of our mouths. Thank you.
No, I would actually say that is actually the non-originalist view, because the originalist view is that free speech is much more narrow than broad. The broadening of it happened in recent times. So that is a recent view that you're holding. Not only does burning the American flag violate community standards of decency, and it violates American standards of decency, but it also shows an insane amount of respect to not just veterans, but our forefathers. It also harms America's image abroad, because the flag is seen as a global symbol of American power. And if we let people burn it, what exactly are we doing here? And so I honestly think that the First Amendment does not apply, because it doesn't say that in the exact quote. So you can make that argument that maybe you can broaden it, but that is not the originalist interpretation. It sets a dangerous precedent when you say acts of vandalism against the country's flag is speech. It is not speech, and I think it's a dangerous precedent to set that it is. It creates public disorder and violence, and we've seen that throughout. Oftentimes, when the American flag is burned at a protest, it causes a riot, and so we've seen that it can make violence. That is the exact point that Justice Rehnquist, Justice Stevens, and Justice O'Connor made in their dissent. They said burning the American flag is not protected speech because of that, and there was no precedent before. So to argue that there is any precedent, there literally was not. There are several Supreme Court cases about it, and not just that, many more lower court cases that have very specifically said laws that stop flag burning are not unconstitutional. In fact, there was even some case in the 1800s that said that laws allowing people to burn the American flag would be unconstitutional, because it would amount as disrespect towards the nation's flag. And I think, and the nation's national symbol. And we are the only Western country in the entire world, basically, that allows our flag to be desecrated and burned. Thank you.
All right, Anthony, start it whenever you're ready. So here's the thing, Chase. So I want to first state that you're claiming that my view is dangerous and that I'm creating a slippery slope, but really you're the one who's creating the slippery slope here, because you're basically narrowing the right to free speech so significantly. Okay, in today's day, free speech extends way beyond just the words that we say. We have to keep into account that society has adapted with technology. In today's day, people are speaking a lot more online than they are in their own households nowadays. Let's be honest, right? So for you to say that no, actually free speech was so narrowed, that actually creates a dangerous precedent that would allow governments to say, okay, well, if you tweet something like this out, so many people can see it, we're going to ban it. If you tweet out that BLM is a terrorist organization, just as an example, that hate speech is going to spread out. Millions of people can see it, so we're going to ban it. That's the precedent that that's the slippery slope that you're setting. And also, I would like to address, I didn't address this in my last rebuttal, but I should have, your point that 48 states had banned flag burning in some sort of way. Actually, virtually all of those, and this isn't me making this up, virtually all of those came at some time of war. Okay, so we have to keep into account that burning the American flag wasn't something that Congress was saying, okay, you can't do this, you can't do this. No, we have to prohibit it. It's dangerous to allow people to protest the government in this sort of way. That wasn't something that was acted upon. That wasn't legislation that was being passed except during times of war, for the most part. I'm not saying there weren't outliers, but that's the fact of the matter here. And yeah, during times of war, that can be true, because your rights limit significantly through times of war. But times of war are not what matters in times of normalcy. And right now, we are, for the most part, at least, in a time of normalcy. And in today's day, right now, I think that there are a lot of people who have serious disagreements with certain things going on in the government, and they're going to protest it in different ways. As long as you are not causing clear and present danger, then your speech is legal and is protected under Amendment 1.
Yeah, so to counter some of that, I would say that the founding fathers had a very high view of the American flag, and so the dissenting opinion in Texas v. Johnson argued that the American flag has a unique set of standards that other flags don't. The flag burning is conduct, not speech. That is what was argued in the dissent in Texas v. Johnson. It is destructive conduct, not speech in the traditional sense. The First Amendment protects the expression of ideas, but not all conducts that communicate a message. And I think we've seen that throughout Supreme Court precedent. And so that is a new concept. Also, the government has a legitimate and compelling interest in preserving the flag as a symbol of national unity. Allowing desecration undermines values that hold the country together. But allowing regular flag burnings not only makes the country more divided than ever, it disrespects our veterans, our founders, anyone who came before us. And I think to say that, oh well, you could tweet something. Yeah, I mean that is technically true. That's why you can amend the Constitution to say that that's protected. But I would actually take the view that no, that's not necessarily protected right now, because you're broadening the sense of the First Amendment, and that's not how that's supposed to be. It's the same argument you can make for many other amendments. I rest my case.
Okay, so I did not even kind of imagine you would make that insane argument, because that is no different. And I do mean that is no different than Ketanji Brown Jackson saying that the Second Amendment only protected muskets. Okay, because at the time, muskets were the available firearm. She is, not mentioning that there were also some guns a little more powerful than that, but obviously none as powerful as even your regular, handgun today. So at the end of the day, no, that's not how the Constitution works. They wrote them in such vague language for a reason, because it's going to extend to, future abilities of such rights. Okay, so when it comes to the Second Amendment, for example, it says you have the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. You don't even think about mentioning the well-regulated part, because that's regarding the militias. So it says the right of people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, right? And that at the time was referring to muskets, because that's what's available. However, we can't say that that's not also referring to a future right, or a future, other modality of the right, which is what a, AR-15 would be. And the same thing goes with the First Amendment. The founders just wanted it to be words spoken out of your mouth. That's how they would have wrote it, but they didn't. They wrote it in vague language for a reason. One, because yes, they do want us to have interpretation and have this argument. Okay, why do you think that they wrote the elastic clause, also known as the necessary and proper clause? Right? There's a lot of things written in the Constitution for our interpretation, so we can discuss these things. But at the end of the day, if they wanted it to where your First Amendment free speech rights don't include or only include words spoken out of your mouth in that future social media, they knew technology would eventually be a thing. If they wanted it to be where things you say on television doesn't count, things you type out doesn't count, okay, then they would have wrote it like that. Wrote it like that. Keep in mind, back then they still had typewriters. They still had, they still wrote out letters and stuff. Did free speech not apply to that? Because if it didn't, they would have wrote that in there, right? So I mean, that's a very liberal way of actually interpreting the Constitution, an extreme liberal way of interpreting the Constitution, to be exact. It's no different than the way Ketanji Brown Jackson is interpreted. It's actually a leftist way, to be exact, and it's no different than how Ketanji Brown Jackson is interpreting the Second Amendment. And that's it for that argument.
Yeah, I'll just make so this will be like my final point of like response. So I would say that the American flag existed at the time. So why didn't the founders specifically say you could burn the American flag in the Constitution? Because yes, you can make the argument to the elastic clause, yada yada. The elastic clause is a thing, true. But the flag did exist, and the founders were fine with laws against flag burning. In fact, some of them were actually passed during the time founders were alive. So you would think that if they were against that, they would have wrote maybe some letters criticizing it or some other communications. But no, they left those laws in place. And the Supreme Court reviewed them multiple times and left them in place until Texas v. Johnson. So I think that this right all stems from Texas v. Johnson, and that just like same with Obergefell v. Hodges, there's no right to a gay marriage in the Constitution. So what makes the right to burning the flag in the Constitution? Because if you don't if it's not in the Constitution, it is not. If it's not in the Constitution, and you cannot broadly make a point that it's in the Constitution, it shouldn't be a thing. And so I think that burning the American flag would fall into that category, and not only that, but it also wrecks our national image, because basically we have people that will be burning our flag, and then our enemies look at us and look at us as we're weak. And I'm not saying that's like the only reason why that shouldn't be a thing, because it isn't. But that is definitely a consequence that our enemies think we're weak, and oftentimes that we can be infiltrated that way. Thank you.
Okay, so you keep mentioning how basically you think that I'm broadening the language too much, but the problem is that you're restricting it way more than I'm broadening it. Because at the end of the day, you're basically saying, okay, no, if it's not literally spoken, that this is a part of the right, then it's not there. Now, in some ways, that's true. Okay, like yeah, there's no way of getting gay marriage out of the Equal Protection Clause. I will agree with that, because the concept of gay marriage never existed. To say the concept of flag burning didn't exist is just outright not true. Like I said, the founding fathers had practiced forms of protest that were way more extreme than that. So to say that it didn't exist, that again, it's not true. And also, what I would like to say is that if you're going to say, okay, well, no, if it's not explicitly stated that you have the right to say this exactly, then by that own logic, you don't have the right to type out you don't have the right, because at the time, remember, the way we speak on social media now, their way of doing that was through typewriters and through writing letters. So at the time, are you saying that free speech didn't extend to that? Because at the end of the day, you're wrong. It did. Free speech isn't just words that come out of your mouth. It is also freedom of expression and things that you type or say in other forms of ways. So that's absolutely what it is referring to. And also, I'd like to say, we haven't even touched upon too much is that flag burning is actually protected among two different rights in the First Amendment. The first one is free speech / free expression, but the second one is freedom of assembly, freedom of protest. It's a form of protest at the end of the day. You might not like to hear that, but it is. Now, am I saying that you can burn it out in public? No, you would have to make sure you're on private property when you do such, because it's arson if you burn it in public. But yes, it is a form of free speech. And all the red herrings, it's why don't we say this with the gay pride flag and with this and this? We should. I'm not arguing against that. I want us to, fix the language up to how the founders intended it to be. They wanted you to have a way to protest the government. And again, I'm not denying that, there were there were things that violated the First Amendment around the time the founders were alive. I'm not saying that it didn't. But the father of the Constitution, James Madison, never specifically touched upon these issues, saying that, he was against this form of protest. He never supported these sedition acts. Right? That was John Adams. That was some of the more liberal founding fathers. That wasn't James Madison, who's the father of the Constitution. It wasn't, say, Thomas Jefferson. So we got to keep things like that into account as well. Again, I understand it's an emotional topic. I know what we see when we see people disrespect the flag, but societal outrage alone does not take away your constitutionally protected right. Is it time for questionnaire now?
I would say so. I think I've pretty much stretched everything I got.
I didn't, Chase, if I came across personal when I made the Kentucky Brown Jackson comparison, I wasn't meaning to. I was just trying to say that I think you know what I was saying. If I came across personal, I'm sorry.
It's all right. All right, questions.
Anyone got any questions for us? Okay.
You want me to take this, or you want to go?
Wait. Repeat the question again. I'm sorry. My answer to this, actually, I will go first, is generally absolutely not. The only time you could argue that it would be constitutional to do such is at times of crisis, at times of war specifically. That's the only time that for the most part, that's the only time these types of laws that were prohibiting flag burning was made. That's the only time forms of Sedition Act were made, except for the first one, which again that should have been struck down. That's an anomaly. But that's the only time that free speech has usually been limited. So yeah, in the general sense, absolutely not.
I would actually say yes. There is some instances where it should be. For example, threats to public safety, threats to public order, threats to national security. Those should all be taken into consideration when regulating speech. Your freedom of speech is not unlimited.
I would like to add a final point since you stopped. I don't disagree. Free speech isn't unlimited. Problem is, though, the only limits to free speech have already been established, and that is when it is causing clear and present danger. So if your speech causes some form of danger to someone, causes someone to get some form of injury, and it was direct, it has to be direct, it can't be indirect, then it would be prohibited. It would be constitutional to prohibit it. My bad for stumbling there. So, with what happened to President Trump when they were saying that he needed to be indicted for, everything related to January 6th. At the end of the day, with that case, and this isn't really a red herring, I'm getting to the point when, in that case, basically, he never explicitly stated for people to march on the Capitol and get violent. In fact, he said to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard. So that would be an example, obviously, where we saw unjust indictments and things of that nature. And I think we can at least agree. I hope we can at least agree that President Trump should not have been indicted on that because the things he was saying did not pose clear and present danger. Can we at least agree on that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So. I thought we could. So, do you at least think that the speech that you want to be prohibited, you at least do agree with me that it has to be direct, even if you think it should go beyond just, things like clear and present danger, what I'm establishing or what's been established, we can at least agree that it has to be direct. It can't be something indirect, like Trump saying "fight like hell" and then them saying, that's incitement of violence.
No, I would agree. Yeah.
Okay, good. At least we got some agreement there. You can elaborate on that, by the way, if you want.
So what I would say to that is that yes, there has to be some clear and present danger, and you can't just take things out of context like that, for example. But I think that if he actually said storm the Capitol or something, that'd be different. Or if he burned an American flag and said this is America, that would also be inciting violence, in my opinion. But I rest my case.
I will agree on your first point. If he would have literally said go storm the Capitol and break windows and do this and that, then absolutely they should have indicted him on that. But of course he didn't. So yeah, because that would cause clear and present danger. But also we have to prove that the violence that was instilled was because of what you said, and what you say has to explicitly state such. So, for example, when and this is just an example, okay, when the Nation of Islam back in the day of Malcolm X was saying very violent terms against white people, a lot of people may say that shouldn't have been legal. Well, actually, no, it would be legal unless people ended up acting upon it, and we could prove that they acted upon it just because of what the Nation of Islam stated. So that's how clear and present danger works, essentially. Anthony, do you have any more questions or no? If you can go first, and then what was last time?
I would say it's going to reduce disrespect, singularly because there will actually be a consequence. So I like before there wasn't a consequence, so I think disrespect was more normalized. But now that there's actually consequences to doing that, I think that it becomes less normalized because nobody wants to go to jail for doing something like that.
Well, I would disagree with what you're saying completely because his executive order was specifically regarding flag burning. And if you notice what Anthony's question was not, do you think there will be more or less flag burning? Of course, we can agree there's going to be less flag burning because it's illegal. But his executive order is regarding flag burning itself. It's not regarding other forms of disrespect to the flag. We're probably going to hear a lot more people say F the USA now because of this. And the USA is tyrannical because of this. And the USA is authoritarian because of this. And the USA is hypocrites and all this and that. And we're going to see more people kneel for the national anthem now, which I assume you think that should be outlawed as well. And at the end of the day, no, you're wrong. Even if we're going to see less people burning the flag because it's now prohibited, which it won't be for long, this is definitely getting struck down, we're not going to see less actual disrespect to the flag because disrespect to the flag goes beyond just burning the flag.
All right. Any more questions, Anthony? Or do we want to open the floor? Okay.
Okay. We honestly, like I said, we did repeat our point so many times, but then we got frustrated and just repeated the point and said, no, this was definitely the most intense debate we've had on the server, probably.
Yeah.
I'll take this one first since you did last time. So
yeah.
Yes, there are definitely, and again, I think that flag burning is a terrible way to go about this, but I'm just saying that it doesn't, because Chase may spin this after my answer. I still think it's protected, but yeah, I think there's better ways to go about it. I think if, say Congress passes a law that you find to be just absolutely offensive, I think the best way to protest that would be holding a sign in public and saying, whatever about the legislation. But at the end of the day, if you start taking away one form of, it's a slippery slope. But yeah, I would say there are more effective ways overall. But I also think you're going to see more protests in general now because of trying to prohibit a form of free speech.
I would actually say that gathering in a crowd with a bunch of people is way more effective than some dude burning a flag on private property. So yes, I would say that gathering a crowd with signs is much more effective, much less inciting. And honestly, I have no problem if there's more protests. Like as long as they're peaceful, like just let them be. Just so that's what I would say to that.
Well, out of curiosity though, let's say so. And I could see this end up happening. So let's say people you said you don't care, you would like it if there's more protests. Fair. Let's say the protests though say, I don't care about the soldiers because the reason that this is getting outlawed is largely, and again, I already said that I love our soldiers. When I look at the flag, that's exactly what I see. But let's say people now start, because when people burn the flag, generally they're not doing it to disrespect the soldiers. But now if we end up telling them you can't do it because that's what it's doing, now they may disrespect the soldiers. They may be more likely to. They may hold signs up that say, I don't care about the soldiers or F them, right? And we know this because this is how the rabid left acts, okay? When we try to say that abortion's wrong, they react with F from kids. So you can't say that, oh, they won't do that. Yeah, they absolutely will do that. Now, to respond to the first thing you said, though, yeah, absolutely, I definitely agree that it's a more effective way to gather with a group of people. But just because it's a more effective way doesn't mean the other way, as long as it's not causing clear and present danger, isn't protected.
I guess I'll just respond to this real quick. So I would say that saying you don't care about the soldiers, I would say that's terrible, and you could make an argument that probably shouldn't be allowed either, but I'm not going to make that argument right now. I would say, yeah, that's terrible. But I think that keeping the fundamental symbol of unity intact, which is the flag, is more important. I will say that. Now, you could argue that maybe that's obscene. Like, for example, the Westboro Baptist Church signs; those are obscene and probably should be illegal. But that's just what I'll say about that.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. That's fair enough. All right, we have a bunch of people in here, and you guys definitely, Anthony, that was all your questions, right? Okay, we have a bunch of people in here, though. Y'all have any questions? Deutsch, Altismo, Devin, Luffy, Wacky, you guys got any question for just one of us, for both of us?
Nope. I didn't even hear half of it. And
Okay.
again, I'm sorry for the aggression. It's not that my ringer went off. It's like the screen lit up when you pinged.
Well, I'll say this then, Altismo. If you haven't seen any of the debate, you probably shouldn't vote on who won the debate. Unless maybe, we end up doing this a lot longer. I don't know. But if we're about to end it now, depends on how many questions we have, actually, is what I'll say. All right, Deutsch, you have a question? Because I saw you on mute.
I just wanted to say that I don't necessarily have any questions. I joined around like maybe halfway through or 3/4 of the way through, incidentally. But I did listen. You both brought up pretty good points, but I just have no questions.
Okay. So I guess if we want, does Wacky, you have a question?
I do have
or
a question.
Luffy, you have one?
This is kind of for both of you, but more for Chase. Would it be with what you're saying? Can I put out a little scenario?
Sure, go ahead.
Say there's a breakup that happens, and someone starts burning all of the photos made in that relationship. So would that be considered like hate speech or like illegal? Because you said the act of burning it is illegal.
I would say no, because fundamentally that is not a symbol of national unity. That is just a problem between two people. So I would say no, that it would be protected by free speech, as with burning most other flags.
I would just like to say, and we've made this point, but at least there are some things that we can universally agree upon. And that, of course, sorry about that. That is, of course, that many of these blue states who are prohibiting and classifying it as a felony and trying people for, disrespecting the LGBT or the BLM flag, that's unconstitutional. That needs to be thrown out the window. That's not okay. But at the end of the day, I just feel that the premise of conservatives, in my opinion, non-constitutionalist conservatives, arguing that you can't it shouldn't be legal to burn the American flag, it's not protected. I feel like they're using the same premise of those who are, saying you can't burn the LGBT or the BLM flag. And it's that, well, it's disrespectful. And yes, it is disrespectful. I'm not denying that. But at the end of the day, I agree. Let's protect this symbol of liberty, the U.S. flag. I couldn't agree more. But it is vastly more un-American to protect a symbol of liberty over liberty itself. And I rest my case on that.
It depends what you classify as liberty. That's what I'll say on that. Because I would not classify disrespecting a nation as liberty. Because you live in this nation, and this nation has done so much for you that if you're going to desecrate the flag, I think that should be punishable, because it is a symbol of liberty, and it is not liberty to disrespect your nation that's given you a home.
Well, okay, but the problem is that if you start saying that you can't disrespect the nation, that it's disrespecting the nation to do this, or this, it's going to turn into just saying anything negative about the government is disrespecting the nation. At the end of the day, we have a right to not just freedom of speech, but freedom of assembly. Which assembly doesn't just mean gathering with a group of people; it also just means any form of protest against certain political symbols, certain political actions, legislation, executive orders, justice, Supreme Court rulings, etc. So, at the end of the day, I am going to continue living on my argument. I'm not even just going to say clear and present danger here, because this goes beyond just the First Amendment. At the end of the day, if what you are doing is not explicitly affecting somebody else, then it is not bound to have a national law banning it. It should either, one, be left to the states, or two, be federally protected, depending on which law we're talking about. In this sense, because it involves freedom of speech, and this specific action does not cause clear and present danger, it is protected nationwide under 1A. And I would also argue under 6A as well, as the sixth of, or not 6A, my bad, A6, Article 6, which is the Supremacy Clause, which states that federal laws, including amendments, supersede that of state laws.
I do have one more question, and it's more for Patriot.
What's up, Luffy?
Should intent determine if something's legal or not?
What was that? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Should the intent determine if something is legal or not?
Well, okay. That if you're talking specifically on this, that's more of a question for Chase. But if you're talking, and I think you are talking more broadly in regards to just, any quote unquote crime, not even quote unquote, just crime, I would say it just depends on the crime specifically, because, I mean, for example, if you kill somebody and it was unjust, but you didn't intend to, yeah, sure, it might not be murder, but you would get manslaughter. So I think the intent can determine what is and isn't a crime, or which crime it falls under. But that, I don't know. That's kind of a question for another time, I would say, if you're just asking it for me. But Chase, actually, I don't know, if someone accidentally burns the American flag, is that protected or no? And they get punished for that as well.
I would say that would be a sense where they should probably get maybe yelled at or something, but not like a crime, because there wasn't intent behind it. Like if it was a genuine mistake.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, what Wacky here? I mean, it's tough, but let's be honest. There are people who are very, very unintelligent, and let's not say that people haven't accidentally burned a flag before, because I'm sure they have.
No, I wouldn't be shocked.
Someone could throw a cigarette and it accidentally gets the flag or something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What do we think? People accidentally burn down their house all the time. I'm sure people have accidentally burned down flags.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a special code. There should be a carve out for that. I won't disagree there.
Yeah, but also I'll say that's. I'm not going to say it's irrelevant. Actually, it is relevant, because in some nations I don't think that they would necessarily give that sort of due diligence. But at the end of the day, though, certain heinous acts are treated differently if there wasn't intention behind it. So yeah.
And sorry, that question popped into my head. Say this is for Chase. Say you're at a bonfire and it's 4th of July, and a kid, not knowing what he's doing, accidentally puts his flag in the fire, not meaning anything behind it, because he's like a little kid or she.
I would definitely say that would fall under a mistake. So therefore, no, you shouldn't get in trouble for that. It would fall under the same classification. That'd be my response to that. All right. Any other questions?
You sure no more questions? Okay, well then I guess I'll put up the poll, but before we get to that, I guess we can just talk about it real quick. If you weren't here for basically anything, I'm not going to say don't vote on the poll, but I am going